branch of these networks. And the question from Ray is, are we seeing the modern version of Operation Gladio in plain sight?
I think it's ongoing, and it isn't connected to just one papal figurehead. An example of that too, and I think another reason they killed the guy in 1978, John Paul I, was he had found out about this thing called the P2 Lodge right in the College of Cardinals. And P2 wasn't just a Freemasons club, but it involved the biggest industrialists, generals, politicians in Italy. It was like a secret government within the government. And they were in touch with groups all over the world that have in place contingency plans for if a particular government is doing things they don't like, you know, like taking over banks or trying to help the people more, you know, whatever. That goes into place. They've got it in England. There was a movie called A Very British Coup back in the 80s about that eventuality where there was a Labour government who started nationalizing banks. Boom, they were out. You know, and the king invited in this new government kind of thing. So that's permanently in place. It's like private prisons. I mean, they're always there if they have to do a coup on somebody. And so that's the thing to keep in mind. Who bankrolls them? Guess who? Vatican Bank usually.
So Jen wants to know, will you be visiting the Vatican on your next trip to Rome, or are you banned?
I'm not banned at all. As a matter of fact, they expelled me from England. No, I will go there. I want to give talks in Rome, and maybe I'll even go visit Big Bob in the Vatican. What do you think, Bob Prevost? Sit down for tea, you know? I mean, like, you know, if the reason I'm not afraid about any of this stuff is because when you see through it, and I'll tell you something, the first time I was outside the Vatican when I did that exorcism in October 2009, I expected to feel really intimidated, right? And I'm standing there and I shut my eyes and it feels like there's nothing there. It feels like there's nothing there. Like it's a big hologram and it's this big void. And I think, what do I have to be worried about, right? And when you have that awareness, you kind of, you're elevated above this fear by which they control us. And I look forward to talking to Italians because I know a lot of them don't like what's going on, but they're trapped in the present system, right? And they need some alternatives, and that's what we're trying to create, right?
Linda wants to know, what is P2 in the Vatican?
It was like I said, a secret society involving a lot of cardinals. That was kind of part of the secret government system set up to take over if they needed to pull a coup. John Paul I, in his investigation of the Vatican Bank, uncovered this P2 thing, the P2 Lodge, and he began to ask questions about it. He was a funny guy. I mean, you talk about honest people in the church, like he did things like he didn't want to be carried in on the papal procession, right? He didn't like the idea of someone carrying him in on his back. His dad was a poor peasant who always voted left wing, right? So he had this kind of egalitarian roots, right? And he first thing he did is not only, he ordered the bishops, you can believe this, he ordered the bishops in Italy to start selling all their expensive jewelry and everything and start giving it away. In other words, he's reading the Bible too much. He's trying to do what Jesus said to do, right? He lasted 28 days. You know, I mean, so that's the thing to keep in mind, that, yeah, there are honest people in any corrupt system, but you can't stay honest if you stay in it. You've either got to collude, or you're either thrown out like I was, or you're killed. And, you know, the beast can't have it any other way, you know.
If the Vatican Bank was co-created by the CIA, why don't you go after them too?
It was created by Mussolini, actually, in 1929, the fascist dictator. But the Lateran Treaty that created the Vatican and gave it the power of the so-called government didn't end. When Mussolini was overthrown in 1943, remember when he was strung up by his heels in a square somewhere by partisans? That should have ended the Lateran Treaty right there, but it carried on because the CIA intervened. The first act of the CIA when it was formed in 1946 was to sabotage the Italian election. Or was it 1948? I think it was 48. Because the left, the communists and socialists, had been the main force in the resistance in Italy and France, and Nazis and the whole right wing were totally discredited. So was the church. Looked like they were going to win the elections in France and Italy. So the CIA funded the Christian Democrats in both countries, and they robbed the election. They stole the election. You know, they told all the Italian wives who went to church, all the bishops were saying, if you vote for the left, you're excommunicated, you'll go to hell. And the US Sixth Fleet was offshore Italy, ready to invade if the Communist Party was elected, or left. It was a communist socialist coalition that was going to lawfully take power, like in Chile in 1973 when they chopped it up. So the CIA has been very close to the Vatican Bank. How do you go after the CIA? You tell me.
Yeah, Kennedy tried. Look what happened to him. So TT wants to know, how modernized is the Vatican in terms of technology? Are they into AI and stuff like that?
All of it. They got the money. Why wouldn't they be? They got all the money in the world. A friend of mine, she was a Native woman. She was adopted and used in Vatican circles, but her stepfather kind of took kindly to her. His name was Cardinal Leger, and he took her on a tour beneath the Vatican Library. And she said, this was in the late 60s, state-of-the-art, military protected archives down there that were the length of football fields. I mean, really vast areas. And if they had that back then, of course they've got everything now, the IT and everything. So yeah, again, we need people on the inside to come forward with confirmation of that.
Ash wants to know whether you are aware of any other secrets hidden under the Vatican.
Well, I think I mentioned this in our first interview about my friend and Cardinal Leger. They were talking, and he showed her evidence that the Vatican had sponsored an archaeological excavation dig in Cyprus in the late 1950s, and they found hard evidence that Jesus had not died and had come and gone with Mary to the south of France. And there's, you know, in the Da Vinci Code, in that you saw a reference to that, of the Church of Mary Magdalene and those whole legends. But they had hard proof of that in not only archaeological but archival stuff they found, documentary evidence about his existence. And my friend asked Leger, like, why don't you share this with the people? And she said, then the church couldn't exist. I mean, if the people knew the truth about Jesus, why would they need the church? So they have to keep the lie going, and that's one of the things. But there's other, a lot more heinous stuff down there. She saw fetuses, she saw body parts, she saw all sorts of weird things, weaponry. It's part of like what we found at, if you remember, I talked about the Anglican Indian school in Canada where we excavated, found bones of children and that were, identified as that. One of the things we found was a reference to early experiments done, torture threshold, pain threshold experiments on children, sponsored by the military, but to see how well the brain can endure and function under extreme pain, torture. And these were experiments funded before and after World War II. Nazi scientists came to Canada, sponsored by the Vatican, operating out of Catholic and Anglican churches. A lot of references to that down there. And there was in the diocese in Toronto, the Anglican church, but that was all destroyed. And when we went public with our investigation, it all got, well, at least removed from public access. It's probably still intact somewhere. That's the importance of insiders to give us this stuff.
Yeah, tying into that view, I just recently interviewed an MK Ultra survivor. It's a pre-recording. That one will be coming out soon. Luke wants to know, what of the Lateran Treaty of 1929? Why do US presidents recognize the papacy's status as head of state as well as head of the Roman Catholic institution?
Very vital question, because that's in a way at the heart of a lot of the problem. Lateran Treaty, like I just talked about, the Lateran Treaty continued unlawfully because in the Cold War environment, the West needed the Catholic Church as a bulwark against the left, which was very large in Europe at the time. And also to, the permanent arms economy after World War II, it kept the world economy going. You need to create continual enemies everywhere. And the Catholic Church is great at doing that, right? So yeah, that's why the Lateran Treaty was kept. It's an illegal document now, but people still acknowledge it. And I already answered that thing about the U.S. government, recognizing the Vatican as a head of state, or as a state when it isn't. It's a fairy tale, right?
You're getting asked whether you thought it was inappropriate of Trump to do the AI picture of him as a pope.
I think it's inappropriate. I mean, the guy's a clown, he's a showman. And I don't think I'm not even sure why Catholics were offended by it.
Mm.
You know, it's just it's a farce. Why get upset about a farce?
D wants to know, is the Pope an extension of the head of the Roman Empire?
Well, he is the head of the Roman. That's the point. It's got a Christian veneer on it, but it's in every way, ideologically and politically, the way it operates. It is the Roman Empire. His title, Pontifex Maximus, was the title of the Roman emperors. The great bridge between heaven and earth. Dies et Dominus, man and God. They believe that he's God and a man. It's to a Christian, it should be blasphemous. And yet, what's really weird, Shaun, is this belief in Christ can coexist alongside this belief in Antichrist. And no wonder it makes people nuts, right?
Do you think that these priests were violated as children, and that's why they become violators?
Well, that's the rhetoric. You know, you can't really blame them because they were harmed as children. Everyone has a choice. You know, I mean, I was harmed as a child in a hospital in Toronto. Didn't make me a child rapist. I mean, you can choose which way you want to go, right? But if you're in an institution that says, yes, you can harm children and get away with it, in fact, we encourage you to, everyone in the world who's like that knows they can become a Catholic priest and be protected. So who does that attract, right?
Yeah, and you know, look at all the people who are violated as kids and don't go on to commit crimes.
Right.
And these predators go to places where they can access kids, and there's nothing more trusted by some people than a Catholic priest with the kids, and it's just instant access. Barb wants to know, is the new Pope a modernist?
No, nothing indicates he is. He's opposed to the ordination of women. He backs 100% the policy of Kremen, of protecting those who harm children within the church. So yeah, no, he isn't.
Do you believe that we will always have popes? That's from Amy.
I sure hope not. I think we should do everything possible to disestablish that institution because you don't need it. If you're a Christian, Jesus never talked about popes, bishops, any of that. Go back to the source, read your scripture, and just follow that. You don't need any human institution. You know?
What is a pope? That's from Chris. I'm really asking.
You mean officially, what is he? He's the Bishop of Rome. Pope is a neurolinguistic term designed. It's from Papa, father. He's everybody's father. You see, it's more the programming. But he's a CEO of the Vatican Incorporated, and he's a lot of other things. But people sometimes refer to the Pope as Antichrist, but in fact, the reference Antichrist refers to Rome. And in the Book of Revelation, they talk about the beast with the 7 heads, 7 hells of Rome. The power in Rome, systemically, is Antichrist. And anyone who sits on the chair, the papal chair, becomes that and embodies it. Right? You could think of it as a spiritual possession, right? Very much.
Claudia wants to know, what happened to Pope John Paul I?
Well, we talked about that. They killed him, poisoned him.
What about the second?
Well, he was brought in to cover. Karol Wojtyła, Polish guy, he came in not only to cover for John Paul I, but America had not recognized the Vatican diplomatically until this guy. In 1982, Karol Wojtyła, the Polish guy, was brought in because, do you remember the Solidarity movement in Poland? It was, the main... Lech Walesa. Well, they were getting massive amounts of CIA money because it's right on the border of the old Soviet Union, and they wanted to destabilize Soviet Union, maybe provoke a war there, get another Czechoslovakia where Soviet tanks would go in. So the CIA was funding them through the Vatican Bank. And one of the conditions that Karol Wojtyła said is, we'll do this for you, but you have to recognize the Vatican. So Ronald Reagan recognizes the Vatican diplomatically, goes against the whole American tradition of separation of church and state, repudiating the Vatican as a government. After 1982, America's in the Vatican camp, and that's due to this John Paul II. So that's why they canonized him, made him a saint, because it's saintly to protect the finances of the Vatican. Don't you know?
What is the alternative to a pope?
No pope. You don't need a pope. You don't need him, Do your own thing, people.
What do you think the ratio of evil, corrupt priests is to non-evil?
Well, they're all expected to cooperate in the crime. That's the criminal policy. In the one case in America that went to court involving someone higher than a priest, the William Lynn case in Philadelphia, it was found that over 1/3 of all priests in the Philadelphia diocese were involved in this network with children. And, so the other 2/3 are expected to protect the 1/3 who are doing it. That's true in any corrupt institution. So they're all involved, either by act of commission or omission. You're all part of a criminal conspiracy. The law doesn't differentiate between a person killing someone and somebody who hid the murder weapon or stood by and watched to let it happen. You're all complicit in a crime, right? And that's the position of any Catholic in the church. You're all complicit as long as you're funding it and participating.
Alice wants to know, does the Catholic Church need to allow priests to marry, as in Orthodox religion? Would that take away this violation of kids and deviancy, etc.?
No, because it's a big business. What goes on with children, the way they're moved around and used and all of that, it makes a lot of money. So it's not really about that. Also, don't forget the celibacy thing was brought in the Second Lateran Council in the 16th century in response to the Reformation. In response to Luther exposing all this Vatican corruption and the Pope having mistresses, Pope Alexander VI had something like 100 mistresses and all these illegitimate children. They were worried that those children were going to all demand a chunk of Vatican money, right? They all expect to inherit. So practically, and to make it look like they're doing a spiritual facelift, oh, the priests are all saintly now, they're all celibate. They brought in the celibate thing politically in response to the Reformation. And so it's always been just a gesture. People know priests aren't celibate. Every priest I've ever known is not being celibate. They've had mistresses on the side. It's just a game you play for the people in the pews, right?